All right, I think we're live. So, look, what we're going to get started with today, this is the first of what will be a regular series of us going through the questions that I get from the rowing community throughout the week. I get about 100 questions a week through Instagram, through Facebook, through YouTube, and through email. And I want to make sure that I actually give people the opportunity to get proper answers. I don't have the time to manually go through and answer each question one by one via email or Instagram message. So I want to have the opportunity to bring it all together, put it in one place where I can direct people to each week so that people can still get their questions answered. So if you're not sure, who I am or why you should be watching this in the first place, maybe you've just seen one of my videos, ended up downloading one of my resources, and then saw this email, and here you are now. My name's Sam Dutney. I am a professional rowing coach of about 20 years. I'm an exercise scientist as well. I grew up in a town called Rockhampton, which is a small country town in Queensland. Rowed there quite successfully. Rowed as a high performance rower for around 3 years after I left school. Rowed alongside Olympians, alongside world champions, worked with Olympic and world championship coaches. And then I got into coaching myself shortly after. Shortly after that, there's some personal circumstances that led to that in terms of I lost my dad, and that changed my approach. But it got me into coaching. In that, I then went on to be a first aid coach, a representative team coach, and ultimately a director of rowing. And what led me to what I'm doing now is that, which is all about making sure that training is specific to the individual and is giving you the best opportunity to succeed for who you are as an athlete. Is that in my first big director of rowing role, I was running the largest program in Australia, and it wasn't hugely successful up to that point. And they hadn't made an A final, for instance, in the boys' first eight in nearly, I think it was 22 years at that point in time. And so one of the things that I started out looking at was, well, why were the crews that were winning or were at the top end of the events always so competitive year on year? And one of my old mentors actually shared with me that he'd already looked into this. And what he had seen is that the crews that were consistently winning were the crews that had the highest proportion of their first and second crews in their first year of rowing still rowing by the time they got to their senior year. And what that showed to me was the importance of retention. And a big part of that, one of the big mistakes I think that gets made in rowing, is that people force people into situations where they have to choose. So that prompted me to go down a path of looking to individualize people's training so that we could make it easier for people to remain in the sport all the way through. And that ultimately came to fruition with making a first A final in 22 years within 3 years. And it was that first group of juniors that came through, we kept 90% of them all the way through. And there was a lot of give and take along the way. Because when you force someone early on to try and make a choice about whether they're going to stay in rowing or in a sport they're already familiar with, often in the early days, they're going to choose the thing they're already familiar with. So that was the first step in me coming to understand the importance of making things specific to individuals. I'll share a bit more about that as we go through, but I did want to take the opportunity to jump into some of the questions that have been submitted. Now, for those of you who are here live, and I can see we've got a fair few people on already, if you want to put any questions that you have into the chat, I'll answer those as a bit of a priority because I want to reward those of you who are here live so that you can get your questions answered first. But otherwise, we're going to jump into these questions that I've had submitted. So most of these, the first ones, we'll go through the ones that came through by email, and then we'll look at the ones that came through from Instagram. So the first question is, this is a question for my 17-year-old daughter. She's 5'6" and 62 kilos. Her erg progress is stalled due to suspected REDS, picked up in March of 2026. So for those that don't know, REDS is a relative energy deficiency in sport. It's basically a mismatch between the amount of energy that you take in through food and nutrition versus the amount that you burn through exercise, which means you often end up really low energy and struggling with fatigue and things like that. She's turned around her diet and fueling. However, her ergo has not improved for more than 12 months. 8 minutes and 6 seconds is PB, despite water and gyms and erg sessions each week. She needs to drop to 7:45 within a few months to secure a US college scholarship partial. The issue appears to be anaerobic. Can you turn around that quickly while also finishing your 12 studies? So the short answer is yes. So I work with quite a few people who have gone from similar numbers, sort of just over 8 minutes, into the low 740s in the space of 2 to 3 months. It's definitely doable. It depends on a whole range of factors, but if you know that her weakness is anaerobic, then addressing that first is relatively straightforward. So to train the anaerobic system, you want to do sessions that are between 30 to 60 seconds of for each working rep, because that's the prime area where you're going to be utilizing the anaerobic system before you drift into it becoming a bit more blurred as to whether it's anaerobic or aerobic. If it's a bit shorter, a little bit too much of the total workload is coming from the phosphocreatine system, which is the peak power system. So that 30 to 60 seconds is about right. And you want a 1 to 6 to 1 to 10 work to rest ratio. So a classic session structure would be, for instance, 6 reps of 45 seconds all out max with 6 minutes of rest. So this is right in the middle of that 30 to 60 second window with a significant period of rest so that you can recover enough to hit the same kind of numbers again. Now, for a session like that, you would expect to see the performance decrease over the course of the session, but you would also not expect it to like fall off a cliff. So the reason you have such a big rest period is you want to be getting within 90%, or rather within 10% of the best number on each rep. If you go beyond that, if you fall to 20% short and things like that, then you do need to extend the rest period. And if that doesn't help, you probably reached the limit for that session. Anaerobic training is important for the 2K, but it's not the only thing. So I would be doing that once to twice a week. You could even have that as part of your strength and conditioning. And then the other side of it is always still going to be aerobic. So you need to be supplementing that with low intensity work, whether it's in the boat, on the ergo. But if your goal is to get the 2K down in that time, then you want to be prioritizing work on the ergo because there is a specificity element to it. Is there an optimal work to rest ratio for each training zone, or is it dependent on the adaptation bottleneck that you're targeting? So yeah, there absolutely is a difference in the work to rest ratio. Essentially, work that is anaerobic, whether that is lactic or the phosphocreatine system, you want to have at least a 1 to 6 to 1 to 10 work to rest ratio. So for the phosphocreatine system, sometimes that might even be higher depending on exactly what you want to do. But you essentially want to have that really high work to rest ratio so that you can repeat the efforts at an extremely high level, because you're trying to get very, very close to your maximal effort. You can't do that repeatedly with short rest periods. You just can't recover enough to be able to do that. With high intensity aerobic work, a 1 to 2 to 3 to 1 ratio can fall into that category. So 1 minute on, 2 minute off, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. These all fall into that kind of 1 to 1. These are what we'd consider transport or VO2 max or aerobic capacity type sessions. For threshold work, I find a 2 to 1 to 4 to 1 work to rest ratio, depending on the nature of it, is about right. Sometimes if it's more of a sub threshold, like a UT1 level, you might go 5 to 1 or 6 to 1. And then for UT2, you could have 20 minutes on, 1 minute off, 20 to 1, 30 to 1, that's going to be fine. But absolutely, it does change. And essentially, the higher the intensity, the greater the rest period that you need in relation to the work. So the greater the work to rest ratio should be. Would you be aware of rowing training programs for masters who have AFib? So AFib, again, for people who might not be familiar, I suspect most people, if you're masters rowers, have probably at least heard of it, but is atrial fibrillation. It's basically a dysregulation of the electrical impulses going to the heart, which can cause for an irregular heartbeat, and particularly a spike in heart rate. I would always say, as a starting point, get cleared by your doctor. Anything to do with your heart, you want to get cleared by a doctor. I'm particularly sensitive to that. My dad passed away when I was 19 from ischemic heart disease. He was 54. So I'm particularly sensitive to heart-related issues. But in general, AFib doesn't have to be a big problem. There are elite athletes. James Tompkins comes to mind, who's the great Australian Olympic rower who had AFib during his international career, and was still able to compete at Olympic level even beyond that. So in terms of generally the types of training that's going to be most triggering for AFib is that kind of anaerobic work, the short, high intensity intervals that are the kind of on, off, on, off, on, off. Particularly some of those ones that are a bit more of a blur between aerobic and anaerobic, that sort of lactic tolerance region where you're looking at maybe 30 seconds on, 60 seconds off. That type of work is going to be quite, or I have found anecdotally to be quite triggering for AFib, whereas longer, more sustained efforts, so your 4x4 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, those kind of longer duration ones actually have less of a trigger because the intensity is a bit lower and it's a bit more of a sustained continuous intensity. And UT2 as well is beneficial. But these are things that are less likely to trigger AFib rather than treating any of the underlying causes. So I would definitely, if you've experienced AFib, make sure you've been cleared by a doctor. You may need to get an ECG before you get cleared, but absolutely go and get that done first. But just as that general rule, the short, high-intensity intervals can be a bit more triggering. Longer, more sustained work, even hard sustained work, tends to be less of an issue. In a lot of the literature and the research around cardiac patients, the 4x4 protocol has been used to help rehabilitate people who've had obviously different heart condition, but heart attacks and stroke, without having issues with bringing on further cardiac issues. So that seems to be reflected in the literature. And I do work with a number of people who have AFib, and that tends to be the direction we go with it. Is doing just steady state for a training block worthwhile? Arman X. Not really. You do want to maintain a level of higher intensity training within that as well. So I can't remember what year the research is from, but there was some research in the last couple of years where they looked at, I think it was in cycling, but they looked at a group even in their off season that did just zone 2 steady state and one that had one high intensity session per week. The difference in the markers of that low intensity aerobic training, so mitochondrial density and then as well as their VO2 max and lactate thresholds and so forth, were the same across both groups. But what the group that maintained contact with one high intensity session per week, they saw that there was an increase in their anaerobic power, and I think in some of their lactate markers as well, around their threshold. Sorry, I think I said that incorrectly before. But even that one session was enough to still give that additional benefit. I think a general rule to consider with training is that you shouldn't be doing just one type of training of any type as the sole thing that you do. Now, obviously, elite rowers do a lot of low intensity, steady state rowing, and even like collegiate level and so forth. But the reason for that is that it's something you can recover from. So one of the ways to think about this is that the higher intensity of the training, the more benefit you do get overall per minute of training. But the higher the intensity, the more difficult it is to recover from. So what we see in the research is that even high intensity interval training and sprint interval training still has a lot of the aerobic benefits associated with low intensity training. Capillarization, mitochondrial density, stroke, increase in stroke volume, all this kind of stuff. But the problem is you can only do it a couple of times a week, usually 1 to 2 times for most people. Whereas the low intensity work still gives you that same benefit, but you can recover from it. And that's why you can use it to fill out your week, your training week with that low intensity stuff without taking away the high intensity. The high intensity is still one of the biggest drivers of your physical improvement, and minute for minute is the best way to improve your physical outcomes. But you just can't do it enough. And total training volume plays a role in overall improvement. So if you were training once, 10 times a week, or 5 times a week, you might have one session that's hard, 1 to 2 sessions that are high intensity, and the 3 to 4, the remainder, are low intensity. If you're training 3 times a week, you probably still have 2 hard sessions a week because you can space them out and you can recover from them. But then your third session probably still has to be low intensity because 3 hard sessions a week over a long period of time, you're going to find it difficult to continue to perform them to the level where you get that maximal benefit and recover from it. How many rest days do you recommend as well? This depends on the individual. So, a good for most people, I would be recommending you have at least 1 rest day per week. Depending on how many sessions that you intend to do in the week, you may have you may have 2 or more if you just physically can't fit more sessions into your week, which is the case for a lot of people. But if you're, let's say you're training 5 days, 5 times a week, 5 sessions a week, and your plan is to stack, say, a morning and afternoon, uh, Tuesday and Thursday, and then you're going to have a row on a Saturday, and that's your 5 sessions. Maybe you're going to row in the morning and weights in the afternoon, or row in the morning and erg in the afternoon during the week. You would be better off spreading that across the week. It's just easier to recover from. You can do it that way, but I would prefer. I would recommend spreading it across the week. Um, some people don't take regular rest days within their week. Some people that I work with really get have issues with their mood and so forth if they don't do any form of exercise. What we tend to do with those people is have a 3-week block, and in their deload, that's where we'll allocate 2 or even 3 rest days to help them have a big recovery from what they've done, and we'll try to make it the what would have otherwise been the rest day during the week, maybe a UT2 or UT3 even session, might be on the bike, UT3, that type of thing. But generally speaking, 1 full rest day is what I recommend for most people. Watching on my erg now, I'm out of wind before I'm out of heart rate. Um, I'm assuming you mean you feel that aerobically you can't keep going, but your heart rate still has room to move. What that can sometimes be related to is that if you've got too much muscular fatigue because you're trying to potentially push too hard, um, uh, or or you've just got residual fatigue from previous sessions, then if the muscles are already fatigued, it's going to be more difficult. They're not going to be able to create the same demand for oxygen, because that's how we then create the energy aerobically. And so therefore your heart rate won't rise as much, because your heart rate rises in response to your body basically going, I need more oxygen to do the thing we're doing. If either the muscles have already maxed out, so they don't need more oxygen, or you're working anaerobically, so literally without oxygen, you actually don't get the same stimulus on the heart rate. So maybe Troy, the consumer of Flagerquan, you could just maybe give me a little bit more clarification about what you mean by that. David Paul, is there a role for AI in prescribing and interpreting training sessions? I think there will be. I don't think there is yet. I think I've obviously experimented just to see what sort of things it produces. At the moment, I think the AI is heavily influenced by what it's able to scrape, which means that it scrapes a lot of, for lack of a better word, a lot of influencer content from a variety of different physical activities, not just rowing. So it tends to not be that rowing specific. Um, it also seems to lean quite heavily on normative data rather than responding even when you provide it with individual information. I think there definitely will be a role. I just don't think AI is there yet. But the rate it's going, I mean, it could be there by next year. I don't know. I think it's unquestionable that part of the future of training will involve AI assisting with analyzing sessions, particularly analyzing recovery data, and making modifications on the back of that. But it's just not there yet. At the moment, I'd say it's like a first year graduate from sports science, so it has a lot to learn. I have a very, this next one is from Gordon Joyce. I have a very solid half marathon, 1 minute, but my 5K and 2K times are not as good, relatively speaking. The last 15 seconds of my 1 minute is really hard. What sessions would you recommend? By saying you have a very solid half marathon, I'm going to presume you mean that. I mean, could you maybe do you might maybe mind sharing perhaps what your splits are for the half marathon and the minute, and then I might be able to give you a bit more clarity. It's normal that the last 15 seconds of your 1 minute is really hard. That is a feature, not a bug. Um, Essentially, it's because it's heavily reliant on the anaerobic lactic system. You are producing a lot of lactate over the course of that minute. Now, before people jump on my use of the word lactate there, um, it is correct to say that lactate is itself not responsible for any of the negative experiences you have when you do that type of work. It's not lactate. It is more typically it's inorganic phosphate and also positively charged hydrogen ions that have a lot of the negative effects that we associate with it. But they're very difficult to track. Lactate is much easier to track, and it is reflective of extremely high levels of glycolysis, which is the breakdown of carbohydrates without the use of oxygen. And it tracks with those markers. So we might say lactic or lactate. No, that is not literally what is causing the burning sensation or things like that, but it is. But it is a good proxy for the things that do. So it's normal in that last 15 seconds, you've built up a ton of lactate, a ton of those other biomarkers, and you're struggling to get through. That's totally normal in that 60-second, and it just means you're doing it correctly. In terms of what sessions would I recommend, generally, if your half marathon is really good and your 5K and 2K times are not as good, I would probably start out. I'd probably start out by looking at some aerobic capacity work, because it may be that you're already operating pretty at a good threshold if your half marathon is good. So the way to think of this is that your VO2 max is kind of the maximum theoretical capacity of what you could do aerobically. Your threshold is what percentage of that you can access. So maybe you're accessing 90% of that available capacity, in which case getting from 90 to 95% is really difficult. You would potentially be better off improving your VO2 max, your aerobic capacity, so that you're at 90% of a bigger number. So this would be work that is like 1 to 3 minutes, maybe 1 to 4 minutes of very high intensity work, 95% of your maximum heart rate or higher, with about a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So classic examples would be things like your 8x500s, your 4x4 minutes, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, 1 minute on, 2 minutes off, that type of stuff. That's probably where I would go initially, but that's without seeing any specific numbers. For head race training, this is from CRC Sculling. For head race training, what threshold sessions do you recommend compared to training for sprint races? I find it hard to calibrate effort in head races, so I feel a mental need for long AT work. Okay. Well, the types of sessions that I do, it depends a little bit on the distance that you're going to be covering. Assuming, I don't know where CRC is, it could be Commercial Rowing Club up in Brisbane, could be an international club. I'm not sure exactly what the distance, but assuming it's between 5 to 8K, then what I like to do, if we know that that's the primary event, is to have one of the threshold sessions that is based around your target pace. And this is going to be more of like an AT to TR session, where you're doing about 120% of the total distance that you'll be racing at the eventual target pace you want to be at. This is taking a short to long approach to training. So you might start out, let's say it was 5K, you might do 12 500s with a minute rest at your target 5K pace, your target pace. And then progress that to 10 by 600, 8 by 800, 6 by 1K, 4 to 5 by 1500, 3 by 2K, 2 by 3K, etc., all at the same pace. And then the other session, I would look to do something that's more around your like 10 to 15 minute threshold pieces. A really one that I find is really good in small boats on the water for a lot of people is as simple as 3 sets of 15 minutes, rate 20, full press. So I don't mean maximum effort, because we don't want to be thinking about the shoulders, but full press with the legs with a 5-minute rest. Your heart rate's actually going to be above anaerobic threshold for this, but it's a really, really good way of training in small weights. And what you'll find is that as you do it over the course of a couple of weeks, your heart rate will actually come down. So once you've done that for a few times, probably 3 or 4 times, you'll find that you actually are doing that in AT in threshold. But early on, you might find that it's higher because that real push can spike the heart rate if you're not used to doing that sort of thing before. When comparing the ability in aerobic slash anaerobic slash peak power for an athlete, how does it change as an athlete matures? Is your great tool for comparing energy systems suited more for adults or kids? Jamie Fitzgerald, great question. So the energy analysis, the energy systems analysis that you can download, and it is actually linked in the description down below. That is geared around masters. So that I've taken there's a male and female version which does have some slight variation because of generally speaking, women tend to have more type 1 fibers, so they tend to be a little bit more aerobically inclined. Men tend to have more type 2 fibers, a little bit more anaerobically inclined. That's a population level thing, can absolutely change for the individual. But it is geared around masters. For youth rowers, it will still tell you the same thing though. So I have different variations that I use with my clients that are specific to different age brackets, and and so forth. But the tool should still give you a broad enough stroke to be able to see what is your weakest energy system. So generally speaking, as you get older, your peak power will naturally decline, but that doesn't have to be the case. And if your peak power has declined because of age, and so is relatively weaker than the others, that is just the sign you should train it. So it doesn't really matter so much which one is stronger or weaker. It might change your 1.0, like your relative score a little bit, but it's not going to change 10%. It's going to maybe change from different age brackets, maybe 3 to 5%. So unless you're borderline already, then you're going to be fine to use those to guide what bottleneck you're looking at. Excuse me. The as for how you should adjust it, if you're working with youth athletes and you've got two systems that are like the same, if they are like their aerobic and anaerobic system, for a younger athlete, if they're the same, I would push towards the aerobic system as the one to target. If they're an older athlete and they're the same, I would look at the higher intensity one, whether that's the anaerobic or the peak power. What I'd often see is that with high performing youth rowers on that particular one, they'll have their aerobic system will be slightly underestimated. Overestimated in terms of the scores that you get. So that's why I'd just lean towards the aerobic for younger athletes, but it is geared towards masters and adults. What if coach says no anaerobic training in the off season, wants just low threshold training and build up to anaerobic when season starts? Well, if that's what your coach is telling you and you're required to follow that program, then I think that's your answer. But what we definitely see in the research is that you still want to keep contact with it. Now, there are ways you can still incorporate that is still anaerobic threshold training, but incorporates some of that anaerobic work. One of my favorite sessions to do, it is definitely a threshold session, is 30-second sprint followed by 3.5 minutes at your UT1 or your zone 3 pace. So below threshold, done twice back to back. So an 8-minute block, 30 seconds, 3.5 minutes, 30 seconds, 3.5 minutes, then rest. That is a really good way of keeping some contact with that speed work. It's a little bit blended as a session. So if you were trying to specifically target the threshold, I'd follow more traditional structures like your 4x10, 3x12, etc. But that's a really good session if you're needing to keep a little bit of contact with speed work. The other place you can do it is actually inside your strength training session. So if you're doing strength training, you can incorporate a very small number of short, infrequent, but very high intensity efforts sprinkled in throughout the session. So maybe at the end of your first, let's say you've got 6 strength exercises, maybe after the first 2, you jump on the erg and you do a 30-second all-out sprint. And then you go back to doing your other strength stuff. And then after the next 2 exercises, you've completed all your sets and reps, you jump on and you do a 60-second. Then after you've done your 5th and 6th strength exercise, you jump on, you do a 30-second. You've done 2 minutes of total work, but you've still given your body more exposure to that anaerobic system. And that can also work quite well in a strength session because The strength exercises help your body to recruit all of the muscle fibers, and then you learn to apply them directly in a rowing context by jumping on the erg and doing that. It also doesn't have to be the erg. It could be the bike. It could be the elliptical. I don't recommend running unless you are a runner. And the reason for that is that if you increase your running load suddenly, or intensity quickly suddenly when you've not done it, you're going to be more susceptible to shin splints, to ankle issues and so forth. So you want to build up running volume before you start doing any high intensity stuff in that, but it could otherwise be running as well. So you can get that anaerobic side from other modes. It doesn't have to be from rowing. How much value does other there we go. How much value does other cross training add? Generally speaking, heaps. So I just had that caveat about running and load. You've asked about swimming specifically. Again, if you're a swimmer, swimming is great cross training. If you swim like Rocky Balboa or Sylvester Stallone from the Rocky movies, then probably not. It's going to be very high intensity and potentially quite difficult. But if you can swim, then swimming is brilliant cross training. It's non-load bearing. It works some of the other muscle groups while still being a great cardiovascular workout. And when it comes to your heart, so whether it's cycling, running, swimming, cross-country skiing, the elliptical, Stairmaster, whatever, your heart has no idea why it's being asked to work harder. It has no idea what it is being asked to do, except that it needs to pump more blood to circulate more oxygen. That's all it knows. So it doesn't care where it comes from. One of my mentors used to say was that the heart doesn't care how it's stimulated, only that it is. And that's absolutely true. So all of the cardiovascular benefits are still going to be the same. There is a specificity element to training, in a rowing specific mode, in terms of which muscles get used and that kind of thing. But it's a small thing. And if you're in your off season or you're struggling with like a sore back or sore ribs or wrists or whatever, then doing another mode can be absolutely fantastic. One thing to be aware of with cycling, because you're not using the upper body, your heart rate will naturally be lower. And it's okay if your heart rate's in UT3 rather than UT2 during that session. Okay, that's absolutely fine, but you should just increase your duration. So if you normally erg for an hour, you might be on the bike for 80 minutes, just as a bit of a guideline. What advice would you give to a new rowing person who just wants to get fitter and maybe lose some dad bod? Yeah, great goal. I mean, I think that's absolutely valid. I would start with your UT2. So if you've not done anything yet, I would start with UT2, a bit like what I was talking about with the running. You want to build up a bit of volume, a little bit of exposure. Once you can get to about 30 to 40 minutes of rowing, then I'd look to starting including one high intensity interval session each week or sprint interval training. And work up towards two high intensity interval trainings. If your goal is just to get fitter and maybe lose some dad bod, then high intensity training is going to have the biggest impact on body composition. So you want to work up to being able to do that pretty consistently, but you don't have to be. But I wouldn't start there. I would start with the easier stuff. Build up, your joint robustness. Build up a little bit of cardiovascular fitness so that you can do those high intensity sessions more effectively and be able to recover from them rather than doing one and wiping yourself out for the week. Aman X, another example. What is an example of an AT piece and the pacing for it, and what should they be used for? So AT is anaerobic threshold. This is training that is done just below the point at which you're going to start rapidly increasing the amount of power you need to produce from the anaerobic system. So one of the ways that you can kind of visualize this is let's say you wanted to produce 200 watts and aerobically you could produce 180. Then you need to make up the difference with 20 watts from the anaerobic system. Now that might be quite a lot. And so because you're using the anaerobic system, you're getting those biomarkers we spoke about, lactate, but the inorganic phosphate, hydrogen ions, etc. So you're gradually increasing that. And the bigger the gap between what you can do aerobically and what you're trying to produce, the more quickly you're going to produce that lactate because more of it's coming from that system or more of the work is coming from that system. So anaerobic threshold is where you'd be trying to work as close as possible to that 180 mark in that example. so that you're trying to minimize how much of the anaerobic system is being used. Now, there's always going to be some amount being used. That's just how your body works. It's not binary. It is a sliding scale when it comes to what energy systems are in play at any given point. But that would be kind of the idea for it. So to give you a little bit of a guide of what it should be, it's probably like 2K plus 11 or 12, depending on what your 2K is. The faster you are, the bigger the gap is likely to be. And so an example session of an AT session, some ones that I use a lot might be, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. So I gave the example before, the 30 seconds on, 3.5 minutes at UT1 pace, so like plus 15 to 17. Done twice for an 8-minute block, 4 minutes rest, do it 3 times. You could also do, for instance, one that I'm a big fan of is 10 by 3 minutes on, 1 minute off, at a roughly 2K plus 12. Now that one, you probably 10 to 12. So with that one, you're probably going to find that you're sitting just over that anaerobic threshold, but because the interval is quite short, you then come off it. Your body has the ability to buffer and recycle some of that lactate. So you kind of go over the threshold, then you come back under it, and then you go over it, and then you come back under it. Another one, similar thing, would be 6 to 10 by 3.5 minutes at about, if you're just using stroke rate on the water, for instance, 3.5 minutes, about rate 24 to 26, with 1.5 minutes rest. Or it could be things like 4 by 2K at kind of rate 26 to 28, depending on the boat class. Or if you're on the ergo, using that kind of plus 12 mark with a 2 to 1 work to rest ratio. So 2K on, 1K rest, or 8 minutes on, 4 minutes rest, 10 minutes on, 5 minutes rest, that kind of thing, done 3 to 4 times. So that would be examples of AT sessions. You can do other ones, like you can do them based on distance, like 5 by 1500s, you can do them or time. But the key is the intensity. You're trying to be at that maximum sustainable aerobic point. In the boat, in terms of heart rate, it's going to be like 80 to 85% of your heart rate intensity. So what I mean by heart rate intensity is max heart rate minus resting heart rate equals your heart rate reserve, times that by the percentage, and then add your resting heart rate back in. So that's called the Karvanen method. It's much more effective for setting training zones than just percentage of max heart rate. Just did your strengths weaknesses assessment, need peak power. What's a good training split? All right, cars eat science. So good training for peak power. Essentially, when it comes to peak power, remember that there are 2 components. There is your ability to express force. So what is the maximum amount of force that you could generate? And then there's your rate of force production. How quickly can you generate that amount of force? So when it's your amount of force production, how much force you can express, you train that through strength training. So low rep, heavy weight, that's how you build that there. The rate of force production stuff for rowing specifically, my preferred session is 20 by 7 stroke max with 60 seconds rest. So you're doing 20 reps of a 7 stroke max test with a minute rest. The goal is to hit the biggest number you can on each rep. But if you fall below 90% of your best for 2 consecutive reps, you rest for 5 minutes. So let's say that your best was 500. Minimum you want to be hitting is 450, but you should be trying to get the biggest number each time. If you get 2 that are below 450, you would then rest for 5 minutes. And the reason we do that is that's roughly how long it takes your body to replenish the stored ATP that you use when you're using your phosphocreatine system, which is the energy system associated with peak power. Basically, you use the free ATP molecules that are already in the muscles, ATP being the energy currency. And then if you rest for 5 minutes, your body will largely replenish that. So you're good to go again. So that's how I'd structure that one. Meant to add, this was for the person who was just looking to get fit and maybe lose the dad bod. Meant to add, physically healthy, no injuries. Should I focus on technique or base/UT2 to get a good foundation? So yeah, that's what we answered. We do want to keep the initial part UT2 just to build up a little bit of that base fitness, resilience in the muscles, in the joints, before going to that higher intensity sessions. The other thing that's worth being aware of is that what we see in the literature is that low intensity work improves not only your fitness, but because of the way it works with building some of the aerobic infrastructure, your mitochondrial density, capillarization, uh, size of your left ventricle, so you can pump more blood per beat, etc. Because of that infrastructure change, you can then you also recover better between hard efforts. So then when you go from doing a bit of a base of UT2 to doing the high intensity work when you're first starting out, you're going to handle and recover from those high intensity sessions more effectively, which means you're going to be able to do it more consistently. Now, that might trigger another question for some people. There was the question earlier about shouldn't we just be doing steady state in the off season? Well, I'm assuming if you're in an off season that you're coming off a season and are therefore already reasonably trained. So even if you had a bit of time off and you're getting back into it, you should have a reasonable base to start from. So that's why you then want to be in a position where you include that little bit of high intensity work from the beginning. HBRA crew, physical therapy told me I have hamstring tendinopathy from rowing. Once the tendon heals, any thoughts on how to train to reduce the risk of repeating this injury? So, a couple of things. First, if you're getting hamstring tendinopathy, one of the issues is going to be that you are overusing the hamstrings rather than the glutes in hip extension. So, learning how to use your glutes and how to actively switch them on is something I would work with your physiotherapist to learn how to do. Okay, because that's going to be point number one. Otherwise, you're going to continue to overload them. Point number two would be that you want to do hamstring training in the weights room. So this would be including things, and obviously not going super hard from the beginning. You got to build into it. That's why I encourage you to work with your physio. Things like your Romanian deadlifts, Nordics, obviously hamstring machines like the seated hamstring curl would be a good way to get started without kind of overdoing it, trying to match other muscles and so forth. But you want to build up strength in the hamstring. You would potentially also want to look at doing, as part of a strength and conditioning program, even a little bit of sprinting, not a ton, but just a little bit, because that's going to be a really good way to strengthen the hamstring as well. And then in rowing, work on your ability to suspend your weight off the catch. So things like catch holds and stuff like that are going to encourage you to use your glutes immediately as you start the stroke. And then that's going to mean that you're training yourself technically to use the glutes as well, which again is going to take some of that pressure off the hamstrings. What's the data forms that you need to coach from afar? I use Garmin chest strap of the C2 and log on the C2 app. Are there any apps that you use to log data that you can assess and coach from? So all of the athletes that I coach directly, we use Google Sheets. So I don't use any apps. I really like Google Sheets because one, I can make it do exactly what I want from it rather than having to go through an app developer. And it means we can put everything in one place, from training schedules to important phone numbers, links, obviously all of the training data, strength program, everything in one place. In terms of what data do you need to be able to coach from afar, the main things I get people to collect is heart rate, splits, and RPE, which is rate of perceived effort. It's just a 1 to 10. How hard did that feel? It's a little bit subjective, but as you do it more, you kind of get a good sense for where things are at. Generally speaking, UT2 is going to be like 3 to 4, UT1 5 to 6, threshold 7 to maybe to 8. Transport's going to be 8, 9, 10. Anaerobic generally is going to be 10. Peak power, ironically, even though it's the fastest splits, doesn't feel that hard because it's so short. But that's the main forms of data that we use to be able to assess. And the reason I like to have 3 is that you can assess or you can validate data from rather than relying on one source. So let's say, for instance, that someone had their splits were normal and their heart rate was elevated and their RPE was elevated. Well, that tells us they're actually working too hard at their normal split, so they should be going easier. But if the RPE was the same as normal and the split was normal and the heart rate was elevated, that could be indicative of potentially early stages of a cardiorespiratory illness. It could be early stages of, or it could be to do with temperature in physical environment. It could be to do with if they've done a high intensity work the day before, and so their HRV is a bit lower, that can also then cause a higher heart rate during the same intensity. So there's a few different things, but it helps us see where are things going wrong, or where are things um, not lining up. And so if we have two data points that match, then that gives us good confidence that that is what's true from that session. So those are the things we tend to record. Some of my clients do their own lactate testing and stuff like that. I have been contacted by a company that I haven't tried it at all yet, so I won't name them, but that they have basically a wearable lactate monitor that I'm still not 100% sure how it works, but supposedly it's able to measure your or to determine your lactate levels while exercising without needing to take blood. So if that turns out to be good and reliable, I would probably start looking at data from that as well, because lactate would be more accurate than heart rate, but I'm a little bit skeptical on whether it's as good as it claims to be. Gavin Evans, what is the best method for determining your max heart rate for a master's 66-year-old? Well, the best method is to see what your highest observed heart rate in the last year has been. That's always what I like to use. There are different tests that you can do, but if you've been racing, if you've done high intensity training and you've been tracking your heart rate, you've probably already seen your max heart rate. So rather than doing a separate test to try and determine it, I would rather you do the you just take the information you already have, and you can use that straight away. What I wouldn't use for someone who is training is 220 minus your age, which is the normative data or the standard thing, and it's just not reliable. So particularly for rowers who are quite aerobically fit compared to general populations, I wouldn't rely on that. Mr. Andre, how might you start using power watts in a boat setting, say with an Empower Oarlock? Yeah, so the Empower Oarlock and the X-Boat, they're really good in terms of the data that you can collect from it. There's a few. It depends whether you can see it in real time. So if you can get data in real time, then you could do some similar testing to my energy systems analysis in the boat. If you've got flat water without a current, you could do that testing, and then you could calculate your power, your wattages based on that. I'm not yet convinced that's reliable, but that's the dream. That's what they can do in cycling, and it's fantastic. So otherwise, the way that I tend to use telemetry is for coaching rather than and review, rather than something that you do kind of in the moment or replacing other things. But if you've got the right type of conditions to accurately test, and you can get the information in real time, that would be great to use. That would be great to use. Sorry, final question. What stroke do you recommend for swimming, for cross training? Regular freestyle or backstroke? Well, I mean, it depends if you're a swimmer. If you're a swimmer, you can do whatever stroke you like, because it's just cross training. We're not trying to be specific in anything. If you're a bit newer to swimming and you're wanting to do it as a form of cross training, but you maybe not that well trained, I'd probably stick with freestyle. Yeah. Why do I feel so effing amazing after a 5x4 minute on, 3 minute rest hit ergo? Well, main reason because your body's releases endorphins when you do exercise. So it's one of the things that you probably heard of, the runner's glow, which is the idea of post session just feeling really great. It's because of the endorphin high. So that'll be the reason you feel so good after it. How long should I rest after a HIIT erg before I return to a UT2 session? So if you're going from a HIIT session to a UT2, I would generally be recommending about, if they're going to be separate sessions, I would recommend about 3 to 4 hours. If you're using it as a cool down, you could jump into the UT2 after 5 minutes. That's fine. How important is strength training for 2K performance? So I'm going to tell you, strength is really important. Strength. Now, how important is strength training? It depends how strong you are. So what is very important, and is unquestionably important, and is shown in literature to be to correlate with erg times and also to correlate with on-water performance, is strength. So strength is a very important factor. It's obviously not the only thing. Endurance, technique, mindset, all the other things obviously as well. But being strong is very important. Now, one thing I'd say on that is that being strong probably doesn't mean that you're going to win a race, but being weak is likely a guarantee that you will lose a race. To give you a personal anecdote, I didn't do any strength training through school. I was a lightweight. My first off season after I started rowing high performance, I did a lot of hard work in the gym, just three days a week, full body for about 8 months. Got to the point where I was squatting about 150 kilos for 3 reps. So what's that? That's like 330 pounds or so at 70 kilos body weight. So more than twice my body weight. I had not done a lot of, I'd done probably 3 rows a week during that time steady state, but I'd really focused on getting strong where I wasn't previously. And the first 2K that I did after coming back from that big strength off season, I took nearly 20 seconds off my 2K in one, like from where I was the previous season to where I basically started the new season. And the only thing that was better, because I wasn't as fit as I was at the end of the season, because I hadn't been focusing on my aerobic system, but I had gone from being weak to being strong and took 20 seconds off just almost, I would say almost without trying, but obviously I'd done the training beforehand to get to that point. So very important. How important is strength training? Well, that depends on whether you're already strong. So the classic example is the Kiwi pair didn't lift. Well, yeah, but Eric Murray and Hamish Bond were already extremely strong and had done a lot of strength training in their life up to that point. So did it make a difference? Did they have to train strength at that point? No. And it certainly is born, the results speak for themselves. But they were strong. So strength training, I think for most people, you're going to benefit enormously from it. If you are already really strong, if you're already squatting 160 plus kilos, you're probably okay. If you didn't strength train as much, you're probably going to be okay. Probably fine. But if you're squatting even 100 kilos or less, you're going to benefit from strength training. Thank you for some great content. You're very welcome, P. Taylor. What's your guidance on the fastest way to increase rowing relevant hip hinge mobility? Okay, so the first thing is that I find the main reason the majority of people can't hip hinge effectively is not to do with mobility, it's to do with postural awareness. So I'm going to show you a really quick little exercise to help unlock that. If you just start by sitting in your chair slumped, and you imagine you have a string attached to the top of your head. And so just before we start, you're sitting on your haunches, you're slumped in your seat like I am now. I can feel my weight is kind of on the back of my chair. I'm actually leaning against the back of my chair, and I can feel my bum's on the back of the seat. If I imagine there's a string attached to the top of my head that's just going to pull me up, 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 I can feel my weight has now come off the back. I can feel where I'm sitting is now on the bony part of my bum. And from here, I can now hinge really easily. When I'm in that slumped position, I can't hinge. I can only curl. Okay? So right now, slumped, I'm stuck in posterior pelvic tilt. When I get that rotation, I can then hinge effectively. So most people just don't do that. They're stuck in posterior tilt. So that little exercise, you can do it sitting on the edge of a bench. You can do it sitting on an ergo. You can do it in your chair. You can do it right now wherever you're watching this. But that's the first step, is actually being able to just go, okay, I'm slumped. I'm sitting on the front. I'm slumped. I'm sitting on the front. Once you've done that, and then it may be, particularly as you get older, there may be some mobility elements that are potentially part of it, then I would look at things that are going to release your hip flexors so that you can move more easily between positions. So things like couch stretch, your runner's lunge, 90-90 hip switch. These kind of things are going to help mobilize your hips a little bit, give you a bit more freedom through the hip flexors. And then the other part that I would look at is your glute flexibility as well. So things like your pigeon pose, your number 4 stretch where you've got the foot crossed over the knee in a sitting position. These types of things are going to help. But I would start by looking at your postural awareness, and that's generally for most people where the issues start. So I don't train extensively anymore. I certainly don't row competitively anymore. I can still row all the way to, and I'm only about 5 foot, 5'10", 5'10" and a half. I can still row all the way to the cage on the ergo really comfortably because I've got really good awareness through my hips. But my glutes are tight, my hamstrings are tight, but I can still do that because of that postural awareness. So that's the first place I'd start. What rate is your 2K predictions based off for your energy systems? It's not based off a specific rate, but it would be looking. I would be recommending. It's based on where the predictions come from. Just to give some background to it, is I've got about collected over the last 15 years. I've now got about 60,000 data points from different rowers, multiple data points from the same rowers and stuff like that, that I keep feeding into a big spreadsheet and producing averages and a regression analysis and so forth, to kind of keep tweaking the numbers, although it's basically settled now. So it's not based on a specific 2K rate. It's based on 2K times. Now, most people are going to be achieving those 2K times with a rate somewhere between 28 to 36. It's a pretty big range. What rate should you be doing a 2K? For most people, I would be suggesting 32 and above. If you are earlier in your rowing and you're not efficient as your rate goes up yet, then you might rate lower. But as you become more efficient and your effectiveness per stroke gets better, I would be looking to increase the rate as you go through. How do you feel about working on explosive strength, speed, strength, power in the weight room? For example, speed squats, trap bar jumps, plyometrics. Yeah, great. Absolutely love them. I think you remembering that there's the two parts. There's the ability to produce force, which is your strength work, and then there is the rate of force production. Now, all of those things are going to help with improving your rate of force production. And the purpose of the weights room is to build general physical qualities that are going to transfer to your rowing. So, if you get strong and you can do really good, trap bar jumps, plyometrics, etc., then you're going to have a improvement in your rate of force production. But to get the most out of it, I would still then do specific work in your sport, i.e. in rowing, on the ergo, in the boat, to improve how effectively and how quickly you can produce that power in a rowing specific context. So going back to those 20/7 strokes, or even anaerobic power. Anaerobic power training can really help with that as well. I mean, obviously it's in the name, but there's also a big part of that rate of force production is neuromuscular connection. So it's the ability of the brain to coordinate with the muscles to do it quickly. You get that from all sorts of high intensity training, whether that's in the weights room, whether that's sprinting, if you're, again, going back to if your joints are up to it and stuff like that, as in running, sprinting, whether it's sprinting on the bike, on the ergo, plyometrics, all of these things are going to have a beneficial effect. And generally speaking, for most of the training programs that I build for people in the weights room, their power component is going to be weights room. It's not going to be on the ergo. But then when they get closer to competition, you might shift out your plyometrics and your Olympic lifts and that kind of stuff for ergo sprints, the peak power ones specifically, to make it more rowing specific when you get close to your target event. But you can absolutely do it beforehand, doing the those other things, plyometrics, and the only one there, I don't love speed squats, if they're what I'm thinking they are. So maybe you could just let me know what you mean by that. How do you measure effectiveness per stroke? Well, one of the things that I would look at is if you use like erg data or erg zone, you can often get SPI, which is a measure of effective work per stroke. If you're seeing that falls off a cliff and you just do a step test, you can do 20 strokes at 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, like with a break in between each. If your SPI drops dramatically, and it should fall, it shouldn't be as efficient at 32 or 36 as you are at 20. Like, no way should you be as effective. But if it's like half, or as you go up in rate, your splits don't go faster, then that's a pretty good sign that you're not yet efficient at that rate. Drats, I came in late. Apologies if you've already answered my question that I submitted via the form. Haven't got to that one yet because we've had so many in the chat. So don't worry. We will be getting to that one. What's your favorite drill or drill progression for coaching improved times within a crew boat? So, a couple of them. With in terms of coaching a crew boat, I always think that there's a couple of things that you want to emphasize. One is how you apply power together. One is how you move together in the recovery. Those are the two biggest things, I think. I mean, obviously you want to get the catches in as one and stuff, but I think that is also an individual thing. And when it comes to the catch, I always feel that you need to get your individual timing right first before you get crew timing right. So what I mean by that is if someone can't get their catch in anyway, then you want to try and teach them to do that, even if initially it might mean they're a little bit out of time, and then you bring them back into time. In terms of applying power together, I really like pushbacks. I'm a massive fan in general of just doing single strokes from stationary with lots of patience, because you've got to apply the power together. But even if you're in a single, if you try and push too hard, you'll be unstable. I find that there's amount of resistance you get taking one stroke from stationary. It gives you so much proprioception, so your ability to feel what your muscles are doing, that you can really feel whatever it is you're trying to work on. So I'm a big fan of that. And for crews, so things like roll up and one stroke, roll up and two strokes, roll up and three strokes, where the boat speed doesn't get high enough that you lose that proprioception. I really like those types of exercises. I really like 0 to 100. So, or the mullet, where you're applying light catch and then building through together. I really, really like a top quarter build. So starting at top quarter as a full crew, really light, then gradually adding a bit of leg speed, then building into full legs, then back to full slide, and then building into a sprint. I find that's really, really good before high rate work. I actually did a video about that on Instagram a couple of days ago. Yeah, those are probably my big ones. The other one, it depends on the experience level of the crew too, as to what you're going to do. So if you've got an inexperienced crew, an exercise I do a lot of, which a lot of people don't like, is what I call the lazy feather. So this is where you draw through to the finish and you just feather on the water. So there's no tap down whatsoever. And then they come forward without the blade ever leaving the water. So they actually have to consciously keep the hands up as they come forward. But the reason I really like that is because it encourages it slows the movement down because there's drag from the water, so they can actually think a bit more about their sequencing. And then it also means that they can really work on keeping flat hands in both directions. I think it's when the hands come up and down throughout the recovery and even the drive that really throws crews off. So getting that flat movement in both directions is very important. And so I'm a big fan of that for crews. Do you ever experiment with accommodating resistance on the erg? For example, attaching a band to the erg handle to change the resistance? No. I would use it for a drill, like to do a catch hold, and you want to restrain the handle, and you might restrain it at various points of the stroke. The catch is easiest, later in the drive is going to be harder to get that suspension. So I might use it for that purpose, but I don't use it to try and add resistance to the ergo. I'm guessing you're thinking around trying to make it more of a like a strength resistance session. But I wouldn't. I don't do that. I would use other tools. If you're trying to add more resistance, I would probably just look at a different exercise and then focus on your rate of force production if you're trying to do power work on the ergo. Big shout of thanks for all your content, your wealth of knowledge I find immediate utility from. Bravo, kiddo. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and thanks for joining us on the live stream today. All right, I think we've just about caught up on the questions in the chat. I know people have been dropping in and out. If you're new, please feel free to drop your questions in into the chat, and we'll keep prioritizing those. But otherwise, I'll start moving through the questions that have been submitted. Not the most exciting question, but Masters women over 5'8" will be eternally grateful. I'd love to see a video explain how to carry a boat when you have rowers of different sizes. For instance, say you have rowers who are 5'10", 5'8", 5'4", and 5'1". Quads and fours are heavy when you wind up carrying half the weight, especially when you are over. And I know 2 rowers aside from myself have had to take time away due to shoulder injuries. Yeah, this can be a real issue. One of the people I work with, he actually ended up hurting his back. Prior to starting work with me, he'd hurt his back carrying a 4. Another friend stopped rowing after 2 years because she was so annoyed with the boat carry. Sometimes former collegiate rowers think everyone should just stand by their rigor, and sometimes rowers who are on the shorter side have complained about feeling body shamed. So this is good. The short answer is there's no really good way to do this, but what is the best way that I have found is to have people at each end of the boat. So rather than having people spread across, is to take the weight at each end. Generally, you're going to be able to, and I would just try and match people of similar heights as best you can. Now, if you've got 5'10", 5'8", 5'4", and 5'1", I'd probably put the 5'4" and 5'1" at one end of the boat to carry it, and 5'10" at 5'8". I don't think it's about body shaming at all. I think that's probably to do with how it's communicated. Yeah, I don't think that shouldn't be coming across as body shame unless people are saying it, you're short, so you need to go there. In which case, I think it's a communication issue rather than a physical issue. But having people at each end and then evenly matched means that there's less tilt to one side or another. So having people at more similar heights, that's going to be the best way to do it. And carrying it at each end rather than having people in the middle, because the boats aren't perfectly flat, even and particularly if they're tilting one way or another, you're going to get quite different amounts of load on people in the middle compared to the end. So I would just have everyone at each end. And to be honest, when I ran school programs, that's how we got everyone to carry the boat. 2 people at the stern, 2 people at the bow, basically the front and the end of the front and the back of the gunnel, not trying to stand with their rigger. The other reason you can do that is it's much easier when you go to roll the boat to not have someone get caught in their rigger. Which then obviously makes it really difficult to carry the boat when someone then gets caught. Next one. Hi, Sam. Realistically, how could I drop my 2K time as much as possible over the space of around 2 to 3 months? I desperately need to lower it. My anaerobic engine is good, but I failed to get peak power though, and my 2K is currently 732. It needs to be sub 7 ASAP for any kind of attention, or else no matter how good I am in the boat, people will look past me. So 732 to sub 7 in 2 to 3 months is a very big jump. Just got to be honest with you about that. Unless you are seriously underperforming your training, as in your training level is much higher than that, in which case it's mental and there might be a big jump from that. I'm not saying you can't do it, but that is a very big jump. I just want to be really transparent and honest with you. Now, how would you go about trying to change it? Well, if your anaerobic engine's good, but you fail to get peak power, that's where I'd start. And as we spoke about before, how do you train peak power? You do weights training, you get stronger, and you do rate of force production. In your case, I would be doing that peak power stuff on the ergo, and I would be trying to supplement as much aerobic work on top of that as you can. That would be month 1. Peak power focus, trying to get that number up. I would want your peak power to be projecting sub 7 before you shifted gears into focusing on other things. Otherwise, the reality is you're probably just not going to get there, being very honest. So you've got to get that peak power. Now, I'm assuming from the person who emailed this, they're probably a male athlete. I don't have an age, but if I quickly jump on and have a look at my more detailed model that I use for my clients, the amount of peak power you'd probably want to be hitting would be around 600 watts. So that's where you'd want to be trying to get to, just to give you a bit of a target, because I know that would be the next question. And then I would be looking at a mixture of high intensity aerobic work that is 2K specific. So we spoke about preparing for head racing earlier, with doing target pace for shorter distances and building up to it. And then I'd have one that was longer, that was an anaerobic threshold, but that higher intensity aerobic pace for your hard sessions, and continuing to supplement as much low intensity as you can. That would be basically it for the second and third month. So if you're trying to get it down as fast as possible, that's the approach I'd take. If your peak power, if you know that you're failing to get your peak power, then I would be targeting that in the first 4 weeks, trying to get it to at least 600 watts. And then I would be putting the attention into that aerobic work after that. All right. Hi, Sam. I've done the energy systems analysis. How do you extrapolate the bottleneck test to 2K predicted times? That is a really good question. The short version is I have tens of thousands of data points and I've done a comparison of essentially different categories of rower against each of their energy systems against their 2Ks to eventually come to a point where we can see, well, what is the relationship between them? General rule, this is not exact, but this, if you just wanted a like a bit of a guide of what that might look like, then it's roughly between 1.8 to 2 times your, your 2K pace is going to be, rephrase, your peak power watts is going to be between 1.8 to 2 times your 2K watts, depending on, in terms of what the projection is, depending what category, male, female, age bracket, and so forth. Your 60-second watts are going to be about 153% of your 2K watts. And depending on your category, your 30-minute rate 20 watts are going to be somewhere between 65.5% to 78% of your 2K watts. Again, females is going to be a higher percentage because they tend to be more aerobic. Male athletes are going to be a little bit less so. All right, next one. Biggest thing that would be helpful, I'm still working full-time and trying to do it all. Cardio, erg, weightlifting, core, on-water rowing, and I don't think I'm devoting the right amount of time to all of them with limited time. I'm a 65-year-old female. I'm in pretty good shape and I have 5 days a week from 5:30 to 7 a.m. and afternoons from 4:30 to 6. How much time should I devote to each to maximize my time? I've been rowing for 10 years with coached groups every week. Thank you. Great question. So essentially what you're saying is you've got an hour and a half, 5 mornings a week and 5 afternoons. So you theoretically could do 10 sessions, which is lots. And it sounds like you are doing lots. I would start with 65 female. I'd probably do 3 weight sessions. That would be the first thing I'd actually put into your program, is 3 weight sessions. And I would make 2 of them concurrent. So this is what I mean when I was talking before about including a small amount of short, infrequent, but very high intensity anaerobic work inside the strength session. So within 2 of those sessions, I would be including that. And then the third one I would have as more traditional sort of general max strength type work, 4 to 6 reps, heavy weights. That leaves you with 7 sessions. I mean, you'd then be able to fit in, assuming you've got the ability to do anything you want, you could 5 rows and 2 ergs, that type of thing. I'd make 2 of your rows bottleneck focused, and 3 of them UT2, and then I'd make your ergs UT2 as well, maybe UT1 for one of them. I'd have to look at all of your data to tell you exactly what you do, but I would start with 3 weight sessions, and the weight sessions should include core as well. So the way that I design weight sessions is that you have movement mechanics, which is, I guess, core, for lack of a better word, core, stability, balance, injury prevention, all those kind of things, and then you move on to doing strength. So you don't do, core doesn't have to be separate, and then you can do some direct trunk work at the end of the session to finish it off. So it might be like some front planks, side planks, that type of stuff. You might also do some anti-flexion work, so things like back extensions. But you're going to be getting a lot of that anti-flexion work, so resisting flexing, doing things like deadlifts, squats, etc., where you're working to keep yourself stable. So you don't tend to need to include as much specific anti-flexion work, even though anti-flexion is probably the most important of those core traits. Hi, Sam. Thank you so much for hosting the live Q&A this Tuesday, my time. You are very welcome. I think this person had joined us just before. I've been following your rowing content for a while and have learned a great deal. Thank you very much. My question is about how deep your drive can be. I know that in the beginning, when learning how to row, we're taught that the blade should be mostly covered except for a bit of the top during the drive. However, a lot of times during practices and regattas, our blades are totally submerged in the water. What's the correct answer? Is it that it doesn't matter as long as everyone in the boat have their blade at the same depth during the drive? So I would absolutely not say that a bit of the top should be out of the water during the drive. Your blade should be fully submerged, because if part of your blade is out of the water, then basically it doesn't have any resistance on it and you're going to be losing force, but also you're going to be more likely to be pushing water, okay, rather than in the water and levering the boat past it. So your blade should absolutely be completely submerged during the drive. As to how deep it is, you'll often see blades or oars that have tape at various points on the shaft, and these are what's called depth tape. Basically, when you go in at the catch, you want to have the first piece of tape to be covered, and then you want the second piece to be covered during the mid-drive, or just covered during the mid-drive. The blade will go a little bit deeper during the mid-drive for most people, but the smallest variation between the height depth it is when it connects versus all the way through, the better. The more power you produce, the deeper you probably need to be. So you'll see that a lot of elite rowers at race pace, that frequently I see people going like, oh, they're very deep in the water. They're really deep. They're too deep. They're digging in the stroke. Like, no, it's because of how much power they are producing. The deeper you are, the more resistance you have. And therefore, if you have enough power, the more torque you create and the more leverage you get per stroke. That's why elite rowers go deeper. It's also why you'll notice elite rowers tend to be a little bit shallower than male rowers. But in all cases, the top of the blade should definitely be fully submerged. In a crew boat, yeah, you do want to be as much matched up as you possibly can. One of my old mentors from when I first started coaching, he told, I'll never forget him saying, just make sure everyone does the same thing, even if it's effing wrong. It's a good guide for crews is get everyone doing the same thing and doing it together. But as I said before, with certain things, I would be looking to do individual timing before doing crew timing. Okay, just come back to a few more questions in the chat. For a 14-year-old boy, 6 months into puberty, about to start his second season in the Swan River, what's the best regular erg session for him to be doing at home on the holidays? The best regular session, I would be looking at something that is based around UT2, but I would probably be looking at slightly shorter where you can push a little bit more. So for instance, you might do like, instead of doing 20 minutes straight through, you might do, 5 minutes or 4 minutes at a time at rate 18 to 20 with a little bit more press and then a minute light. That's going to mean that you can practice applying a bit more power, which is going to help with your muscular coordination and things like that. But it's also going to mean that because it's quite short and then you have the minute rest, even though you're working harder than UT2 pace, your heart rate should still level out. What I'd be looking at is that you want to be finishing the 4 minutes inside the UT2 range. So you want to be getting up into it inside that 4 minutes, but you don't want to be over. If you're over, you're still going too hard and I go a bit lighter. So it's not like all out push or anything like that, but you can just push a bit more than normal UT2. That's going to be a good balance for someone who's a bit younger to practice actually pushing and applying force through the stroke, and then being able to recover. And you might do that for, say, 4 times. That's 20 minutes. You might do 2 to 3 sets, depending on how much time you've got. The other session I really like for people around your age, well, actually, I love this session for everyone, is 8 by 5 minutes, rate 22 at your UT1 pace with 1 minute rest. If you're only doing erging, say, 3 times a week, you'll probably be fine to recover from that. So we talked earlier about you do get more bang for your buck per minute doing higher intensity training, but you need to be able to recover from it. UT1, you'd probably recover from if you're only training 3 times a week. If you're training 5 times a week, I'd be looking at that UT2 stuff. Hi, Sam. I'm a 56-year-old masters rower, and it's my 5th season back to rowing after a 30-year hiatus. Welcome back. I train regularly on the water and the erg and have always been in pretty good physical shape. I recently completed your testing framework and had highlighted that my aerobic base needed serious attention. Today, I did a UT2 workout of 3 by 30 minutes with 2 minutes rest. Cool. My results were not impressive. Image attached. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so splits like 217. That seems fine. For UT2, that's probably about right. Particularly coming back, that's probably looks like your heart rate's in the right place, so you're probably around a 7-minute forecast, I'd imagine. Let me double check let me check the number that you sent through from the. Sorry, everyone, just bear with me while I check the. I've lost that person's message. All right. Well, I've lost it. Sorry. Anyway, I can see that the splits though were 217. So That looks fine. Honestly, I wouldn't be worried about that. So the main thing with UT2 is that you want to do it at the heart rate. And so if that's what the splits are for your heart rate, that's totally fine. I mean, something to consider is that Simon van Dorp, who is the fastest human who has, at least up to this point, who has ever done a 2K ergo, is the world record holder. His UT2 splits are in the high 150s. So if he's 35 seconds slower than his 2K pace, and you're at 217, if you're in the right heart rate zone, I wouldn't be worried about that. That's fine. Yeah, no problem at all. I spent most of the 90 minutes working to keep my heart rate below the threshold for each piece. Perfect. To accomplish that, I had to seriously ease off on the output and finish the workout with a positive split over the 3 pieces. So you got slower. Yeah, again, that's pretty normal. What that means is you're starting out a little bit too fast, and so you're experiencing what's called cardiac drift, which is basically the longer the session goes, even at low intensity, because there is a small component of anaerobic throughout, you're always kind of drifting slowly upwards. And I would just start it a little bit slower. The other thing that I really like to do in terms of setting up your UT2 sessions is, rather than monitoring your heart rate throughout, is check your heart rate at the end of each piece and see whether it's inside the zone, because that's automatically going to account for that drift. So if you did 30 minutes and you're at 217 average, and your heart rate ends up above UT2, you just need to do the next one slower. So maybe it is 220 or 219. And then if it ends up inside the zone, perfect. You do the same thing again. But that way you're accounting for the drift across the 30 minutes. The reason I prefer that rather than trying to manipulate it during the piece is that, number one, heart rate is a lag measure. So sometimes, you start rowing lighter, but your heart rate doesn't drop immediately. And so you end up with these big fluctuations in split, which makes it harder to establish a good quality rhythm. So I would use that approach. That's how I structure it. Take your heart rate at the end of the UT2 piece so that you can assess the drift. The other thing that's really important to know, and a lot of people don't realize, there's a great piece of research that came out this year. I saw Dan Plews. If you don't follow him on Instagram, he's fantastic at the Plews. He's a brilliant exercise physiologist. Does a lot of work in Hyrox and endurance, but he was actually the physiologist for the Kiwi pair. Really interesting stuff. But he did a great video on Video Carousel about the particular research piece, where they looked at, I think it was in runners, and they had one group that trained at the bottom end of zone 2 and one group that trained at the top of zone 2. So UT2, top of the range, bottom of the range. I think it was 12 weeks. And what they saw was that over that period, there was no difference in the improvement. But the group that was at the bottom end of their UT2 or their zone 2 reported lower levels of fatigue and perceived effort, but they got the same benefit. So even if you finish the piece and your heart rate's like in the middle of UT2 zone, don't think you need to be at the top. Anywhere in it is fine. As I do more UT2 work, should I expect it to become easier managing my heart rate while maintaining a consistent output? Yes. So the more you do it, and the more you do that style where you pick a consistent split, hold it all the way through, and you finish in range, the easier it's going to become. And that's what's going to really improve your aerobic system. But I would also have 1 to 2 hard sessions per week, as much as you can recover from. So maybe it's only 1. If you're 56, you probably get away with 2 still in your 50s, but in your 60s, sometimes it can start to, for some people, it might need to be like 3 every 2 weeks, like 2 and then 1. I haven't got your overall profile, sorry, to be able to check, but yeah, that's going to be either probably hit or threshold as those bottleneck sessions. Okay, back over to the chat. If my peak power was a 1.23, nice. Anaerobic was 1.10, anaerobic was 0.97, and my peak power was still relatively low, 601 for a 27-year-old man. That's cool. What would you target in training first? So this is a really good question, Zane. What's your goal? So maybe, I know you're in the chat, so if you could maybe post, what are you trying to get it down to? So there's a couple of different approaches. One thing, if I was looking at that, I'd be saying, okay, you want to do your aerobic system first and try and bring things into balance. But if you have a particular goal and you're a fair way off that, then I would actually start with peak power. And so one of my clients, who I speak about I've spoken about a few times because he did such a great job, he was a pleasure to work with, Kingy, when he was trialing to make the Masters Interstate 8 for Queensland, for his state, for the first time, we needed to get his ergo time down. And so we could tell from his testing that he just wasn't there in any of his systems. And so that first thing we did, even though it was already his strongest system, was we targeted his peak power until those watts got to a point where they were forecasting where he was aiming for. And then we brought everything else to catch up. Now, we did that over a bit of a longer period, about 6 months. But if you have a particular goal, I don't have a race that I'm particularly trained. Well, in that case, I would focus on your aerobic system. I'd focus on balancing your systems before. And then once all of your systems are balanced, then I would do peak power and you basically try and unbalance them again. What do you love most about what you're doing in the sport these days? Quite a lot. I love that get to work every day with all different people. So I work in Top Crew Academy between my coaches, our other staff, and the athletes. We work with a couple of hundred people from all over the world. So I get to see what all sorts of different people. I've learned so much about different types of different regattas, way different things are structured in various countries in terms of rowing. Seen some of the recurring issues that are the same, whether it's technical training or a lot of administrative issues in different countries that are just the same, replicated everywhere, which I found really, really enjoyable. I'm a talker, as you can probably tell. So I love I love the sound of my own voice. No, not really. But I love being able to talk about something I'm really passionate about. I love sports science. I love exercise physiology, and I love rowing. And so being able to talk about those and do that as a career is really great. The other thing that I love compared to running school programs, which is what I did for a long time, and I had plenty of success. We won first states, won nationals, all that kind of stuff. Built big programs. I really loved doing that. It was great. But what I love most about this now is that for me, it's the balance that I get to do this and I get to do it with, I guess, on my schedule. I don't have to. I don't have to be at the shed at 5 a.m. 6 days a week for every session. I'm not. I do plenty of calls late at night, but I do that because I want to, not because a parent's rung me out of the blue and caught me during family time or things like that. So that's probably one of the things that is not specific to rowing, but that I love about what I do is particularly because I've got young kids. I've got twin 4, nearly 5-year-olds, and we've got another one on the way. So being able to be present as a dad is really important to me, particularly because I lost my dad at 19. So it's always been something that wasn't his fault, but that's always something that's been really important. Is I want to be there for and present in my kids' lives. So I get to do that through this, and that's really great. Something I really love. Any tips to stop getting bored after 20 minutes on the ergo? Okay, so I don't know whether you guys would have ever heard of a person called Alex Hormozy. He's like a business coach in the business space. But he has this thing he talks about called the value equation, which is that how valuable something is dream outcome times perceived likelihood of success divided by effort and sacrifice and time delay. I think of motivation as much the same thing. So how motivated you are during an ergo is, number one, what's the goal you're working towards? If you don't really have a goal, it's easy to get bored because you're not actually motivated to do anything in particular. You're just doing it for the sake of it. And if that is the goal, that might be a strong motivation, but not necessarily. But let's say you do have a dream outcome you work towards. So keeping that in mind and being can help with that. But also, how likely do you think that what you're doing is going to help? So if you don't really understand why you're doing the training session, then that's probably not going to transfer. You're probably not going to be as motivated. You're not going to be as bought in if you don't understand why you're even doing it. So making sure that you actually understand how the training is helping, why it fits into your program, why you're doing it is going to make you more motivated as well. Then if you think about that divided by effort and sacrifice, time delay, effort and sacrifice, make it easier. So lower intensity is going to be easier to stay motivated to keep doing than high intensity because there's less effort and sacrifice. As you get fitter, it's going to become easier. And as you like your joints and stuff like that, as they become more robust, it's going to become easier and it's going to reduce that effort and sacrifice. And the other thing is you can also break it up a little bit. So I see some people who say that, for UT2, you need to be doing 90 minutes or whatever. And they basically say you need to do it as close to just one continuous block as possible. That's not borne out by research. I haven't seen any research that once you normalize for the total amount of time in zone, that doing it in a continuous block is more efficacious than breaking up. I haven't seen anything that suggests that. Happy to be proven wrong. So breaking it up into smaller chunks. If you know you get bored after 20 minutes, just do 20 minutes at a time. Do 20 minutes, have a little break, get back on, do the next 20 minutes. Now, obviously, that means that your heart rate's going to lower and it's got to come back up again. So maybe you don't get as much time in zone doing it that way. But if you got 3 blocks of 20 minutes where you only got 16 minutes of effective work versus doing one good one, or like 20 minutes and then the last 10 minutes is 10 to 20 minutes is a wash and you get 40 minutes you get off. One version you got 48 minutes in zone, 1 minute you got 40 and maybe not all of it in zone. So I would rather break it up, make it easy for yourself. Is 5'4" too short to be a junior women's rower? No. Straight no. I mean, there's so many great examples. And whether it's for lightweight or even for heavyweight. I mean, I know she's a little bit taller, but like Janine Gamillan was a world champion at 5'7". I know it's another 3 inches, but that's the difference between a junior rower versus world champion. 3 inches, I think, is an acceptable difference. There's a difference in height between Olympic gold medalists and the average rower at clubland. That's okay. I think my big thing about height, it's so overvalued, but I think big part of it, because I post about it fairly regularly, and people often will come back and be like, well, yeah, but you don't see that many short people on the podium. And first of all, yes, you see fewer short people, you still see some shorter people, but also whether you win an Olympic gold medal or medal at the Olympics is not what defines the sport. Most people, I would say that probably every single person in this chat, and certainly 99% of the people I work with, because I do actually work with some elite rowers as well, but 99% of the people I work with, and I would say everyone on this video right now, we're not trying to win an Olympic gold medal. So what does it matter if you have to be taller than average to be an Olympic gold medalist, which is not even true, because we see that from people who are not winning it. But who cares? Like, what's the difference? And the lower down the pyramid you go, the shorter everyone gets. And the less height is matters, because all of the other factors like technique and strength and mobility and endurance and everything else become proportionally more important, because there's more variation. How fit someone is going to have far bigger impact on how fast they are than how tall they are. Now at an elite level, everyone's really fit, everyone's really strong, everyone rows really well, everyone's got a great mindset. So maybe these intangible factors start to play a bit more of a role. Sure. But 5'4" too short to be a junior women's rower, absolutely no chance. So there's some more questions in the chat. Is it better to use a lower drag factor for UT2 training on the ergo? Not necessarily. I think drag factor is, again, something that people worry way too much about. There's no research that shows it is associated with higher rates of injury or anything like that, which was this kind of like old wives' tale, particularly in Australia during the 2000s. And I think part of that came from Drew Ginn got a really bad back injury leading up to the Sydney Olympics, and then that kind of scared everyone off the erg. I think I was a little bit too young for it then, but I feel like the erg was blamed and high drag factors were. But I also know he said that he did a lot of high drag factor stuff as part of rehabbing it. So yeah, generally speaking, I think use whatever's comfortable. And if you know a particular session that you do consistently, that you know what it feels like, you know what your splits should be, you know what your heart rate should be, and you do that session a lot, I would play with different drags and see what you like. So me, I prefer to do my ergs at a higher drag factor because I like being able to just kind of lean my weight against it. Maybe that's because I'm no longer a lightweight. And when I was, I couldn't do that. And now I can kind of use my mass a bit more. And I enjoy the higher drag factor. I don't go any faster, but I just like it more. Okay. How much should a 16-year-old junior rower lift to start lifting regularly? 2 to 3 times a week is great. I see a lot of young rowers and frankly masters rowers as well who end up doing like 4 or 5 day splits where they might do like an upper, lower or push-pull legs or even a bodybuilding split. I think 2 to 3 days full body is absolutely fine. And the reason for that is the main reason is when you do a leg day, if you actually do a leg day, you pretty much can't walk afterwards because you put so much stimulus into the legs, and that then affects your rowing training. And you can only do it once to twice a week and even be able to recover between those sessions. Whereas so maybe you do squats, deadlifts, leg press, leg extension, and seated curls all in one session. You really smash your legs. And then you do it again a week later. Or if you do push and upper lower, and maybe do it a second time. If you did full body twice a week and you did squats and deadlifts, and within that session, just those two, and you did 3 sets of each, you've probably done 6 sets of squats and 6 sets of deadlifts across the week. If you're doing an upper lower, like the same number, 2 days a week, upper lower, you should be doing 1 leg body session a week. You're probably still only getting a total of 12 lower body sets. So you probably get the same amount of work, but you did it all in one go, and then you couldn't do anything else after it. So I much prefer full body, particularly for juniors, but just for athletes in general. Weight suspension. Are you actually lifting the butt off the seat, or is it more like a feeling? You are lifting up off the seat, but really minutely. So you shouldn't actually leave the seat. In the same way that if I put my feet on the ground now, I've got them flat on the ground, I can start to lift one leg up, and I can feel that my weight comes off the foot and it's just about to leave the ground, but it's still very lightly touching it. That's kind of thing with the seat. So I never actually lose contact with the ground, but I can release the pressure. And that's basically what happens with that suspension. You should feel a lightness on the seat. So like your weight's very lightly being lifted off, because there should be a lift force generated. But you're not trying to come off the seat, because that means too much of the force is going up and not horizontal. So you do that on like a catch hold where you actually lift off the seat and hold, or the stand-up drill or things like that. But that's because what you're trying to do is exaggerate that feeling, exaggerate that lift force feeling, not because it's what you're doing when you normally row. And that's the case for most drills. Most drills, you are exaggerating something so that when you go back to your normal rowing, it continues. Not because what you're exaggerating is the way you're going to row when it comes back. You're just trying to take that concept. What are your thoughts on how much and what gyms? Okay, there's pretty much the same thing we're saying for. What are your thoughts on how much and what gym split I should be doing? 2 to 3 days a week, full body. If you want a guide and you are like 60, starting to lift regularly, DM me on Instagram or Facebook, or email me, and I'll send you. I've got a 12-week beginner strength program. It's completely free. It's literally 2 or 3 day a week options, 3 separate 4-week blocks. Exactly what exercise to do, what sets and reps to do, videos for them. I would start there. I would just start with that. I struggle a lot with mental block on the ergo. Any tips? Okay, so this is a really big one for a lot of people, whether it's on the ergo or in the boat, having a mental block. The first thing I would say, mindset, super important. One of the most important things as a multiplier. So if you have a terrible mindset, you will be dreadful, even if you're really physically capable. But it's kind of allowing you to access the physicality and the technical ability you have. So if you have a bad mindset, it's awful. But if you've got a really good mindset, then making a fractional improvement is only going to fractionally improve your own end result. And sometimes I see people who will message me and say, I've got a mental block on the ergo. I try and hold this split, and then I get to 800, 900 meters in, and I can't hold it, and I drop off, and I think I've got a mental block. That's probably not a mental block. That's probably you're not fit enough or strong enough to hold that target pace. So I would always differentiate first. Do you actually have a mental block, or do you have a pacing issue? Because if you have a pacing issue, you just need to go and get fitter. And sometimes what we perceive as being like mentally tough is just being fitter. In rowing, the fitter you are, the easier it is to appear to be tough. Now that said, if you actually have a mental block, you've demonstrated in training you should be able to do a certain thing, and you can't do it on race day, the pressure gets to you, etc. There's a couple of things that I do. The first one is in the lead up, if you experience anxiety, I focus on what I call 15 minutes after successful completion. So this is where you are thinking about what are you going to feel like 15 minutes after you have finished the race or the erg piece or whatever it is, and it was just the best performance you could have done. How will you feel? Not straight after, because you probably just feel exhausted, but 15 minutes later as you reflect on it, what are you going to feel? You're going to feel joy. You're going to feel elation. You're going to feel pride. You're going to feel satisfaction, all of these things. And those things, these positive emotions, you want to think about how you're going to feel. Because the reason we get anxiety when we think about future performance is we're imagining ourselves in that setting and we're feeling what we would feel about that. Okay. It's actually the same way that we have empathy for another human being. We imagine what it's like to be that person and we then feel what they feel. With that anxiety, you're imagining what it's like to be in this potential future version of yourself. What will that feel? What will that feel like? So we can counter that by imagining a positive situation, and what will that feel like? And that approach I find really helps with the lead up anxiety. Not instantly, it's not like make it go away, but focusing on that can relieve the anxiety in the lead up to the event. The other thing is mindfulness. So this can sound a bit woo-woo and a bit like buzzwordy, but mindfulness just means being present in the moment that you're in right now. And so when you think about what you're doing and specifically what your actions are and what you're feeling and what you're experiencing, then that's drawing your attention away from thinking about the future. And again, that anxiety is from imagining that future situation. So one of the things I did with the sports psych when I was rowing at a high level myself, we did this exercise where we had a piece of lemon and we put the piece of lemon in our mouth. And the initial reaction for everyone is, "Ugh," it's disgusting. But then you had to just hold it there and then you ask specific questions. Might sound a bit weird, like run your tongue over it. What is the texture? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? And when you're focusing on these specific elements, you didn't kind of notice the whole thing. And it actually wasn't bad at all. But when you first put in, you're like, oh, because it's the overwhelm of all of those things rather than being able to focus on one thing in the moment. And so often when we get to racing, we have this really wide focus. What are other people doing? What's the wind doing? What lane are we in? All these things. And being able to bring back to a narrow focus means that you can be focused on your actions. So that's where that mindfulness comes into it. And you can practice it, things like body scan, but some practical ways you'd apply it during an erg or in the lead up would be things like focusing on your breathing. So the breathing pattern, focusing on the feeling of connecting through your feet, something really specific about a physical sensation that you're having is going to help you to then bring your attention onto that rather than the broad strokes. And that can really help with anxiety as well. And then the third thing I would say is that you want to have a plan about what you're going to do and a plan for what you're going to do when things go wrong. So what are your technical focuses? What is the pace you want to be at? What's your wiggle room? You should have a goal and a stretch goal. So you start conservative and then you can push towards that stretch goal. Those are the things that I would focus on. If you're struggling with a mental block on the ergo, 15 minutes after successful completion, mindfulness is part of your preparation, and then have a specific plan for how you're going to approach these points. And know that the hardest points for everyone is going to be between like 400 and 600 meters. That's because your energy systems are changing over from predominantly anaerobic to predominantly aerobic. And that sucks. That hurts. And so that is always going to be tough. About 900 meters and about 1200 meters. Those points really difficult for everyone. Know that so that way it doesn't feel like something's going wrong. You know that is an expected feature of the ergo, not a sign that something's going wrong. There's a lot of talk about letting the blade drop into the water, but that seems like it would be too slow. What is the right pace for the blade to go into the water, and what do you suggest doing in training? So I would say that letting it drop into the water is not too slow, assuming it doesn't have far to travel. So if the water's here and the blade's up here, then letting it drop, is going to take a little while. If it's here, it's going to be really quick. If you're letting it drop, gravity is 9.8 meters a second of acceleration. That's really fast. And if you sit with if you put one finger on your oar and you hold it just off the water and you lift your hand and you try and actually get the finger off the handle faster than it rises, you've got to move really quick. So letting it drop in is actually plenty fast enough. The bigger thing is preparation. So you already have the blade square and moving towards the water before you arrive at the catch, so that when it gets there, it just, I sometimes think about as you go reach the front, you almost want to take take the top the top millimeter off the surface as you go in. Okay, so that way you're thinking about just taking the top off as you bring the blade into the water, and then you can just let it drop in and let gravity do the work for you. Um, okay, next question. Um, how often, we've already sort of answered that one. I'm about to start novice coaching and I have very little coaching experience. If you were given a group of complete novices, what would the first day to week look like? Well, given I've done more than 1,000 learn to row, I helped more than 1,000 learn to row athletes, I feel very qualified to answer this. The first place I would always start for learning or for teaching is with getting the right positions. And I would do it on the ergo before you ever get on the water. So I'd get them on an ergo. This is or how I actually start with learn to rows, and get them set up in the catch position. Get the hips set up, get them compressed, get them arms extended properly. Sometimes for really real beginners, I might start them a little bit less compressed so that their heels are already down, just because it's a bit more comfortable for them. But then they're going from that position, get them set up properly, and then get them set up in the finish position properly, get them back up in the catch, and then just tell them, I want you to push, and I want you to push until you get back to the finish. And they'll naturally go through that sequence really well. The rowing stroke is actually a very natural movement. And we make it hard through developing lots of bad habits and looking for load in the wrong places and all this kind of stuff. But if you get someone set up in the right position and they know what the finish position is, and you just tell them to push from that position into the finish, they will get the 99% of the movement right on their own. So I'd always start with that. Learning that, then we'd teach the recovery sequence. So I'd actually teach the drive sequence first, catch and finish position, then drive sequence, then recovery sequence. That's probably your first lesson. So when I ran Learn to Row programs, I actually moved away from starting on the water. We started on the ergo. We do 1 to 3 sessions on the ergo before we got on the water. Then when you get on the water, it's probably, if it's novices, you're probably in a crew boat. I would just do partial boats. I would teach them to sit the boat up as one of the first things. And I used to, as a bit of a fun exercise that they would remember, I used to do donuts around the boat in the speedboat with them practicing holding the boat level. So like half the crew holding level, the other crew with their blades off the water, and practice. They had to keep the boat level. Really good way for them to learn. Very, like, obviously I would never did it to a point where anyone was ever going to be unsafe, and you'd stop as soon as you saw them if they didn't appear to have the confidence or the ability to do it. But you practice that, learn how to sit the boat up, and then you want to move into doing partial crew rowing. Just practicing, initially from one stroke at a time, and then maybe a couple of strokes in a row, and then building into, rotating through. You want to move as quickly as possible once you're on the water to as many people participating as you can. But you need to have the platform. So I wouldn't get full crews going most of Learn to Row, if at all. Anyway, that's where I'd start. A lot of these questions we have already answered. So I'm just going to move through some of these. Is it worth buying your own erg? If you are going to use it, then yes. Then the ability to even to not have to spend 10, 15 minutes to go of commuting time to the boathouse or the gym, and being able to do it at home, is an extra 20 to 30 minutes you could be training. So if you're going to use that, great. Or if you're short on time and that's going to be a problem, then absolutely use that. That's going to be great. What was your time the first time you did a 2K, and how old were you then? So came through a program where we had no ergos at all. So through school, I had never done an ergo. The first one I did was on leaving school, as part of trials for within the high performance club that I went into, and so I was a lightweight, and I went out for that first one at a 126 for the first 500 meters. So 126 500 meter pace for the 2K as a lightweight would have been significantly the world record. It may shock you to learn that I don't hold the world record. And I think I finished at like a 2:12 split. My final time was, I think, 7:22 or something like that at 18. And I did it again 2 weeks later, not doing it like an absolute moron, and did like a 6:40. So that's probably what you'd say would be my first true erg as a lighty at 18, was a 6:40. I was about 65 kilos. But the real first time was 7:22, and it was all because of pacing. So very hard lesson learned harshly. Is backsplash a good or bad thing? Backsplash, So backsplash is a sign that the blade has entered the water while you're still traveling forward. There should be a little bit of backsplash, and the faster the boat's moving, it will actually get less and less because the boat's going to be changing direction faster. But you should be looking for backsplash, particularly at low rate, particularly while you're learning, because you want to have that emphasis of the blade moving down towards the water. You won't see much of it at high rate. The GB crews tend to have still a bit of backsplash at high rate. Most other nations don't. There's a little bit more, or it's very minimal. But you should have backsplash in training, definitely. My forearms keep burning up when I race. What can I do? This is a grip issue. This is basically the muscles through here get too tight because you're gripping too tightly. So it could be grips, depending on what you're rowing in, it could be grip size, could be how you're holding it. So if you've got handles that are too big, you'll get really sore through here. I used to experience that when I was in high school. In the single, I used to get really bad forearm burning from using the blue handles. And when I switched to the yellow, and this is the croaker ones, so the intermediate size, it just went away on its own. So but it is a grip issue. You're either holding it incorrectly, or you are, which could be because of the size of the handle, or just because you haven't got your grip set up properly. What's the best warm up for a 1,500 meter course there and back, in total 3,000 meters? So you're saying you've got 3,000 meters to work with. So best warm up, depending on the session, if it's high intensity, and it's going to be high intensity aerobic, whether it's race prep, threshold, VO2, etc., I would be spending 25 to 30 minutes. So you're probably doing depending how long that takes you, 1 to 2 laps. I would include probably on the way back if you're doing 2 laps, on the way back on the first lap, I would do about a minute at your target pace, your race pace, and then I'd spend the rest of the time doing paddling. But I would also warm up before you get on the water. So following a ramp protocol, raise your heart rate, core body temperature, activate your muscles, mobilize your joints, potentiate your nervous system. If you want to know what that looks like, I do actually have a resource for that. So please feel free to DM me, and I'll send you the link for that ramp protocol. And then that document also has recommendations around on-water and off-water warm-ups, ergo, on-water sessions, race day, UT2 sessions. So just DM me for that, and I'll send it over to you. Is there anything I can do on an ergo to help my catch? Yes, definitely. So most of the reasons people's catches are incorrect is going to be because of how their body's set up on the way forward. You can obviously work on that on the ergo. So as you come off the back on the ergo, you should be aiming to get the handle set over the toes at about quarter slide, or at least over the ankle, depending on your flexibility. Most people at quarter slide, they'll kind of go over, they'll rock to about here, and then they'll pop the knees. So they might be over the mid shin. You actually want to get that body set earlier. So you should feel a little bit of a stretch behind the knee and the hamstring, but just to the point of stretch, not to the point of pain. Definitely not to the point of pain. This means that you're going to get your body set up earlier so that when you come into the catch, you don't have any additional movement. So you can just roll in, push back without needing to continue to move the body. And the fewer moving parts, the easier it is to get the catch right. The other thing is people who row the blade in on the water do the same thing on the ergo. As they come out and they come past the knees, they'll kind of have a tendency for the handle to follow their shin down into that gap between your knee and your feet. And then their hands will come into the ergo too low to the cage, and they have to lift to be able to start. But most people don't do that because they're not thinking about placing the blade because it's on an ergo, and so they'll row like that. And they're not actually connected until they get to this point. So carrying the hands higher means that they can connect immediately. So both of those things, hand heights and getting the body position set early. You can do those on the ergo for sure. Last one from the submitted ones. What or who is your favorite rower? Historically, I really, really enjoyed watching Zach Purchase. Beautiful technique, used his body incredibly well, and some great footage online, which also makes it easier. Olaf Tufte was one of my heroes growing up. He was the Olympic champion when I was kind of in my formative years, so that was a big deal. It was very sad to about his passing, but he was definitely one of my heroes. I really enjoyed current rowers. I really enjoy watching Imogen Grant and Lauren Henry. I think they both row so well. I mean, a lot of the as an Australian, it pains me to praise the English, but I really like the style that they row, and obviously they've been very successful. But I also really love the relaxation that you see in the Dutch crews. So Caroline Florine was in Paris. I really liked watching her row. So there's a lot of great crews and a lot of great rowers that I enjoy. Some of the other historic ones on the sweep side, I was a big fan of Drew Ginn and Duncan Free. Amazing pair. I think they were absolutely phenomenal. I probably preferred them to Ginn and Tompkins. Whether they were, I don't know whether or not they were faster. Obviously, they both won gold, so they were both the best in the world in their respective areas. But there was a little bit of a different style, and I probably marginally preferred the Ginn and Free combo over the Ginn and Tompkins. All right, last question in the chat then, and we'll wrap it up. Recommendation for sweaty hands while rowing. Well, if it's during the session and you're currently rowing, you're pretty limited by what you can do. You can use like a little bit of a very small amount of talc powder. I'd be very small amount pre-session. It's not going to last the whole session though. If you're getting splashed a lot, that can make it like amplified. But you've just got to try. I'd take a little towel in a Ziploc bag, like a little gym towel in like a big Costco Ziploc, and use it to dry your hands and the handle in between sets, just to try and keep it as dry as you possibly can. And one of the other things is in terms of maintaining your equipment, you want to give the handles a scrub, not the sculling rubber handles, but like if it's a sweep oar, you want to give the handle a scrub with an abrasive like sponge, or if it's a timber veneers, even like a wire brush. Because what happens is that basically there's all the micro pores in whatever the material is, and it gets dirt in it, and then it makes it smooth. And so then it's not as you don't get as much natural grip. So that maintenance of your equipment in advance is going to help. But then for the session itself, I'd take a little gym towel in a Ziploc bag so it doesn't get wet in between, dry your hands and your handle in between sets. That's all the questions that I'd had submitted and gone through the chat. If there are any last questions that people wanted to ask, I'll hang around for a couple more minutes just to see if anyone else has other questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. It looks like we've had a couple hundred people over the course of, nearly 2 hours. So thanks very much for joining us. I really appreciate everyone for making the time. Hopefully you got something useful from what we talked about. And even if you didn't ask the question, hopefully it came through from someone else's question. Oh, I have got one there. Love your work, Sam. Does running translate well to improving aerobic capacity with longer intervals? Yeah, so going back to the cross training, running is absolutely a good choice. If you're not used to it, build up your volume of running before you get into doing harder runs. But if it's something you're used to doing and it's part of your kind of overall process, running is really effective. It's not as specific as rowing or cycling, just in terms of the muscles used, but it's a fantastic choice. So I definitely encourage. There's a lot of people who have gotten a lot faster doing running, but I would probably look at some other options first. But yeah, great choice. My pleasure. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Anyone other questions? Otherwise, we will call it there at 12:30. I might just let the stream run until 2 hours. There's another hour, minute and 40 seconds or so if people have any final questions. But otherwise, thanks very much for joining us and for joining me, and appreciate all of you. And we'll look to do these again more regularly if you've got questions. And just a little bit of a plug, I guess, for myself. In the description down below, you'll find a link for the testing analysis. If you haven't seen it before, if you've come to me through a different resource, then I would recommend checking that out. That's great for setting up your rowing training and understanding what is going to be the right things to be focusing on for you. And also, if you are looking for any assistance with your rowing, please feel free to reach out and book a call. We do one-to-one coaching with athletes. We help by identifying what is your biggest weakness, or the biggest bottleneck in your rowing. It might not just be your energy system, so that we can then identify what is going to be the best way for you to train, for you to be able to build out a program for you, and to provide the ongoing coaching and support so that you can actually implement and achieve it. If that's something that sounds interesting to you, there's a link down below for that as well. Hi Sam, where can I get your weight training program? Send me a DM or email me, if you're not on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll send you a copy of that over. I did a post for it 2-ish days ago on Instagram, so potentially if you just go there to my page, it's the one that says if you need it says you need strong legs for rowing. That's got the resource in it if you want to access it through there. Otherwise, just send me a message or an email. Thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate all of you, and you have a wonderful, nice day wherever you are in the world. We'll see you next time.